Okay, guys. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Um, have a good day. How are you guys today? Feel okay? So, yeah, we are very grateful today because I have the chance to have this chit chat, a small talk with Muhammad Hasan Khan. Am I spelling correctly? All right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. He is currently a software engineer at Google, and also he's formerly employee of Amazon and Microsoft. So we are not going to talk about the companies, but we are uh, we are more talk. We will talk more about the programming stuff, the programming world. How is it best to do this and that, and maybe all the bad stuff that we should not do at any cost. But first of all, maybe you can share us your journey a bit about and how can you end up in Google currently? Just a small glance.
Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillah ar-Rahmanir Rahim. So my journey before Google, I was working in Amazon, and before Amazon, I was working in Microsoft. I came to the US in 2013. I was before that I was working in Netherlands in a company called Hives, and basically one thing led to another. Microsoft, somebody told me to apply. There was somebody, one of the hiring managers who posted on Twitter that we are hiring. So I just submitted my resume there, and I got shortlisted by the mercy of Allah, and they interviewed me and hired me. After that, I've been contacted by recruiters from Amazon and Google. Uh, when I was working in Microsoft, I from there I did interview with Google. I could not clear it the first time, and then I went to Amazon. They interviewed me, offered me a job, and
Mm-hmm.
when I was in Amazon again, Google contacted me. These recruiters basically contact you even after, if you don't clear the interview, they contact you again. So they contacted me again. I interviewed once more. I did not clear it, and then eventually, they contacted me again, and then I cleared the interview and I went to Google.
Mashallah, quite a journey, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so basically, when I look into your LinkedIn profile, I thought that everything would be as smooth as it just one, two, three, and then jump to each company just like that. But eventually, there's a lot
Yeah.
of interesting journey. Yeah, you have that then.
Yeah.
Okay, so about this recruitment stuff, can you give us a hint or more, maybe how does they do the recruitment? I mean, not in the detail, but do they interested more in how we can solve the problem instead of just, oh, this guy is mastering a JavaScript, for example, or one or two programming language? Which way do they go?
Right. So um, the best answer would come from a recruiter because they're the people who are looking for candidates. I can say things what I've observed, but it's important to note that I am a single data point in a sense that I can only speak from my perspective, what I have seen.
Okay.
But since I'm not in the position to shortlist people or reach out to people, so their perspective might be different. What I've seen is, uh, first of all, being in a reputed company does increase your visibility because I've been in the industry from 2008, all right, and I wasn't contacted by recruiters from these big companies until I was in Microsoft. Okay,
Okay.
and before that I was applying myself. So just what country you are in also makes a difference. When I was in Pakistan, I was applying. I did not get a lot of traction, but when I was in Netherlands,
Oh,
uh,
okay.
suddenly in Pakistan I did interview with Amazon, but I did not get any traction from other companies. When I was in Netherlands, I was interviewed by Amazon and Microsoft both. Amazon did call me on site, but because of visa issues, I was not able to come. And then, so I think location matters, where you are, and which company you're currently working in also matters.
Mm.
Other than that, what your resume shows. I think if your resume shows skills that are valuable in the industry, and for
Mm-hmm.
example, these companies look for generalists.
Mm-hmm.
They're not looking for somebody who's master in specific programming language.
Okay.
What they're looking for is what you're able to accomplish, right? So if you made different kinds of applications, large scale systems, distributed systems or things like that, where when you write your resume, you mention things like, improve the performance of this thing, or, created a system distributed over,
Okay.
geographies or whatever, comprises of multiple servers or client and whatnot. If you explain a client server architecture, or, basically a significant sizable system, that attracts their attention, the kind of stuff that you've done. Other than that, your community contributions, like for example, if you have open source projects, or if you're a hobbyist
Okay.
developer building your own applications, publishing them on app store, these kind of things show that this person is interested in programming, right? They're basically passionate about their career.
Mm.
Because somebody who's just doing it for the sake of just doing it may not be spending extra time to build things, right? So if your resume, like if you have 100 resumes and all of them, let's say, have computer science education, okay, so that's common. The thing that will distinguish candidates is how many of them have participated in programming competitions, maybe software competitions,
Okay.
how many have their own GitHub profiles and open source projects and community contributions, maybe something on Stack Overflow, having good reputation there. So that stands you out from rest of the people. I think these kind of things matter,
Yeah.
besides your location and your company. And obviously you have to write your resume properly to highlight your accomplishments. I've seen a lot of resumes that people have submitted on LinkedIn to me, and I've seen that many people don't spend a lot of time writing their resume properly. Like if you
Okay.
just say, for example, I built a web application for saving XYZ, whatever that may be. That's not very attractive, right? So if you mention a few technologies you used, or uh, you know, uh, if you can mention some metrics, it had like say 250,000 users,
Oh,
or
okay.
things like that. That kind of the way you explain your work, that also matters.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it just come to my sense. So it will not only show that you are able to use that programming language, but it also shows that the tech stack you built upon the product you built is scalable and it can be used by many users and everything. Yeah. Okay, that's kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, is it possible for you to tell us how your employer, I mean, all the companies you work for, maintain the level of work at the top? Like, how's their management and how they treat the company, the employee, or something like that? If you're, if it is possible for you to tell us.
Yeah. So in the last three companies, basically, are generally, I would assume, in US I've only worked in three companies, and all three of them, alhamdulillah, were big companies. So my impression is that this is probably more broader trend in the industry here. Basically, there is emphasis on autonomy. A single developer usually builds feature end to end. They have the ownership. There is more individualistic culture, right? In where I come from, in Pakistan, for example, there's more team oriented or group oriented work. Here it's more individualistic because you own a particular feature, and
Mm,
you have to do the design and development and testing and everything, and even deployment, right? So that's one a big difference. The other is there's a lot of emphasis on diversity and inclusion and respect. So basically treating each other very respectfully, and treating everyone the same regardless of what their background is. And then there is regular performance reviews that happen like at least twice a year in all three of the companies that I've worked in, where basically you have to mention all your accomplishment in the last 6 months, and then your
Okay.
peers review you. There is 360 review model where your
Okay.
peers give feedback about you, and you write feedback about your own self. Your manager writes feedback about you. So from that aspect, it's very competitive because you have to remain in good shape. Like you can't afford to go down in your performance for very long. Like dips happen every now and then, but if it's sustained for a few months, it will show up in the performance review. So um, yeah, in being respect, diversity, inclusion, individualistic, and very a lot of emphasis on high performance.
Oh, quite interesting. Okay, okay. Yeah, some of the things you've mentioned, maybe I haven't found it in the local company yet, but maybe it will be a good input for just in case one day I started my own company. And then, is it true that I heard some people say that big those big tech companies are not specifically asking you to be mastered in one language. It's just like they are language agnostic. It's just that you can put any tech stack to do your job as long as it's best and can do the job done. Is it true?
Um, uh, One aspect is that they do, for the most part, hire generalists, and your solution is really just built on a single language, right? You have
Mm,
to write scripts. Your scripts may be bash scripts. You have might depending upon what stack they have, like would be PowerShell scripts, and then you might have, if you're working in the cloud, then they have their own templating languages to describe your whole service and cluster, and then you have
okay.
web application. If you have a front end, that's going to be JavaScript. If you have back end, then it's going to be whatever language they are using in the back end. And because like I mentioned, you own the feature end to end, then you have to work on all the parts. Like sometimes there are front end engineers who are dedicated to just working on the front end,
Mm-hmm,
and maybe some companies may have internal teams for specific language frameworks, so you need people who are expert in that language,
mm-hmm,
who are building framework for that language. But these are exceptions. The vast majority of the engineers are basically working on the entire stack, and that would require them to work in different languages. For example, I'm working in Chrome OS right now, and that requires me to work in Chrome browser, which is C++, Chrome
mm.
OS operating system, which is also C++, Android, which is Java, right? And then that integration tests that we write are in Go language. So,
Okay,
and Chrome OS UIs are sometimes written in HTML and JavaScript. So, as a developer, it's not acceptable to have the attitude where you say, I'm going to only code in this language. Then who's going to do rest of your work if you have to
okay,
build the whole thing? Yeah. So especially when you own the whole feature end to end. So, and having good knowledge or strong knowledge of any language is something that's valuable, obviously, because then you will write code properly, you will follow the right patterns, and you'll write clean code because you're aware of all the constructs and best practices. But that shouldn't mean that you're limited to just one language, right? You
okay.
have to use
Agree.
whatever is needed to work on whichever part of the stack you're working on.
Agree. Completely agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so I get curious. What was your first programming language you ever mastered?
Mastered, I wouldn't say I've mastered any language, but when I learned programming when I was like a teenager, 13 years of age, I guess, or maybe
13.
younger,
Okay.
I started with GBasic. GBasic was the, you know, call
Mm.
it a child of GW Basic.
Okay.
Uh, and yeah, GBasic was a language that was available in a Commodore clone that I had, um, a console that you would attach to TV, and you would play games on it. But the only thing that it had in it that would resemble to a computer was G basic programming language.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a keyboard attached to the console, so I could type programs on it. G basic is what I started with. Then I learned GW basic, Q basic. I came to Visual basic. Then I worked in PHP. Uh, in the university, I worked in C++. I did some I did C sharp, whatever language. Like I did an internship in Perl also. I've used whatever language that was needed these days. Like I mentioned, I'm working in C++. In Amazon, it was mostly Java, and there was
Mm, okay.
their own language, data path also. I've been like using different languages, but I wouldn't say I'm master in any language. These languages anyway keep evolving, so you
Yeah.
can only be master if you're author of the language.
Oh yes. Yeah. There's one said there's a once a professional told me that uh, if you call me a master in this programming language or that programming language, you're completely wrong because every time I get to be able to do something with this language, new stuff coming within a week, within a month,
Mm,
or within a year. So there's no such thing as a master in tech stack. This day you're able to do this, and then the next day maybe like in the next few hours you have this news at the blog, and maybe on their GitHub they just push something, or they just deploy something which is something new, and you have to study it again. So it will be everlasting learning curve. So don't give up on learning tech stack. And I said, oh, okay, that's interesting. Basically that was when I was still in college. Anyway, uh, uh, is currently, or maybe for sometimes ahead, yeah. Do you have any particular programming language that you could see suggest us to learn first to build, especially for a totally newbie, yeah? Because in my position right now, I'm teaching mostly newbie to programming language. Is there any tips from you which programming language will be best for us to start with, and then can go to this way and that way, so they can have their mindset. Uh, we are talking about mindset, right?
when I had to teach programming to my kids who were 9 and 10 years of age at that time, I picked Python
Okay.
because I wouldn't have to then teach them object-oriented programming. Why do you need to write a class and all of this?
Mm-hmm.
I just tell them, these are the commands that you write, and this is what the output you would get. This is how I started with G basic. Like I said, right, which is not an object-oriented programming language. So I think ultimately the simpler language that you pick, which is any scripting language, is fine. Uh, so because you don't want to start with a lot of concepts, uh, the less concept you have to begin with, the easier it is to consume and digest the content, and then slowly then they can be introduced to other more advanced concepts. So I think Python is fine, or any other language would also be fine that does not require them to think about objects and design in the beginning.
Okay. Uh, so, it if I can put everything in conclusion, that maybe let's say I will let's say I teach Python, or myself, I learn Python myself. Uh, do we also need to uh, complete all of those things that I will learn with the theories? I mean, we have best practices, code conventions, and everything. Or every like those kind of theories could go along the way. Just don't put it like this one first and that one first.
Somebody who does not have a CS background,
Mm-hmm.
I think they should just when they pick any functional language or scripting language, they should start with that, and they should have spend a lot of time just building programs. They don't need to know what best practices are. They
Okay.
don't need to learn any. I don't think they need to learn any CS concepts or anything. because they have to get used to solving problems and writing code. This is very important because once a person gets that mindset, then we can tell them, let's say whatever best practices are, what clean code is, what's maintainability and whatnot, and how to structure your program nicely and whatever. All of these things come later because the person has to, develop that interest. If you add a lot of theory right in the beginning, it might become boring or overwhelming for the person who's not even
Okay.
yet tasted, when the person tastes the ability to create things on their own, right, without having, without having to worry about how to write clean code, what the best practices are,
Hmm.
whatnot. Just the, enjoyment of writing programs, solving problems, making small things, that gets the person excited. And once they're excited about it and they're passionate about it, then they can
Yeah.
learn other concepts. So I think uh, it's up to the instructor and the person themselves to figure out when is the right time.
Okay.
um, yeah, but we'll have to see whether the person is picking up just the basics first and just they're enjoying writing programs and building things.
Okay. Okay. I think I get your point. So after we love doing what we are doing, love to write the codes, and then we can, hey, it already good, but maybe you can upgrade your level by we have a code convention, we have this and that. After we found out that this person is quite exciting and quite anxious to go further with the programming language. I agree. Some kind of good points for me. Maybe I will try to reflect myself whether I already very love programming so much. Okay. uh, so I guess that the next question already answered by you back then. So from what you have answered back then, that you are testing your works using Golang or something. So I guess you're embracing the TDD, right? You're embracing tests. Is it true that test is part of your professionalism? So if you're a professional uh, programmer, it means that you can also have a proof of that my code is clean. My code is somehow like bulletproof or something. Is it true that all of the tests was mentioned purposely go to that way?
You need to make sure that whatever you're writing works, right? Whether you write a
Yes.
unit test, whether you write an integration test, um, some kind of test you should write. That's ideal.
Mhm.
And it all depends on the state of the code base and how easy it is to change. Sometimes you cannot write immediately a test without refactoring the code, and refactoring the code may not be straightforward, especially if it's legacy software. So when we're starting off a new project, it's ideal to write unit test as you go. But I would expect an engineer to do that. But if you're maintaining existing software, like we can't just dictate that you should be writing test for everything, uh, because with sometimes, without refactoring, it's not even possible to write a test, and that refactoring may not be safe. So you have to look at case by case basis what you're working on, and how easy it is. Ultimately, there should be some kind of test. If you can't write unit tests, you would write integration tests. Testing is important. It's not acceptable to have an application that does not have any tests at all, especially if it's large scale and you have multiple team members. Like if it's a side hobby project and you're just making things and for your own fun and just putting them on GitHub or whatnot. If you don't have tests, nobody minds because you're not sharing code with anybody. It's just whatever, your side thing. But if you're working in a team, you're building a software for a company, you're going to be maintaining it, you're publishing releases. How would you know if you've broken something if you don't have any tests, right?
Yes.
If
Agree.
you change a line and you introduce a bug and there is no test for it, like your customers are going to be affected by it. So
Yeah,
if you care about your customers and if you care about your product, especially if it's in production, it's being used by a lot of people, you need tests.
of course. Agree.
Yeah.
Okay. I work as an instructor at the bootcamp in Indonesia. The bootcamp called Activate. So bootcamp basically only have like 4 months. sometimes we have full beginners in studying programming language, and currently we are studied with JavaScript because the curriculum team thinks that that language currently can go through a lot of end, because it can goes front end, back end, and also mobile. So we try to teach them a language which can go to all of these aspects. Uh, but prior to coding, we put problem solving, algorithms, step by step in doing things at first, before students start coding. Do you think it is something? It is the right thing to do, according to your point of view? We wish. Uh, I usually ask my student to tell me first, what do you want to do. I give them a problem, and then, what do you want to do? How do you want to solve it? Before you start, open your laptop and write some codes. Is it a good thing to do, or do you think just let them code widely doing codes, and then I will come jump in as to check whether they are correct or not? What do you think?
Like I mentioned, I don't think students should be taught like data structures and algorithms before they learn any language.
Mm,
They need to be able to think in terms of code, and they need to be able to write simple programs, because that gives you the ability to communicate with the computer and think in terms of code, right? Once you have that, and that's what my personal journey has been, and that has been helpful for me. I don't think we should start with the theory. We should, like, at least at the bare minimum, they should know what a for loop is. How do you print to the screen? How do you take input and whatnot? How do you declare variables? How do you calculate mathematical expressions or whatnot? And then once they have the basics, then we can tell them, okay, can you write a program that would calculate how old I am if you enter my birthday, right? And then if they can write simple programs like that, um, that is part of it is solving problem, and part of it just exercising whatever they learned, the tools they learn, and how to use them. So it's a mix of both, but at this stage, I don't think it's useful for them to know any kinds of algorithms and data structures. These are advanced concepts that they can learn later. They need to get used to working with the basic constructs and writing simple programs.
okay. Okay, I'm taking a notes, and maybe I will put it to the curriculum guide. Uh, so, wait, hold on. It seems like, okay. Got it. There are a lot of nice things we can learn today from you. Thank you. And maybe I will now call it. This is the last, maybe the last two questions from me. I will call it big three questions. Big three questions means uh, I will ask you for three big top suggestions for programming newbies, and maybe three big mistakes to be for us to be avoided, so we are not jump into that mistakes. Maybe you can give us the tips and tricks. Maybe three biggest top suggestions for us, and maybe three big mistakes that you will ask us to avoid for someone who's start learning programming.
Okay. So I'll just mix them both, the suggestion
Okay, it's okay.
and what to avoid.
Okay.
Basically, with somebody who's just learning programming language, first of all, like I mentioned, they should just pick any language, whatever simplest language they can pick, whether it's JavaScript, Python, any scripting or functional language they can pick, and they have to first learn to write small programs and get good at just conveying their thoughts in the language. I'm not talking about mastering the language, but knowing it well enough to be able to translate your thought process into statements in the language. That's one. Focus on learning one language, and second is uh, at that moment, just don't go and pick another language. Don't switch from language and language to language before you get at coding. So stick to the language, because your highest priority at that point is to be able to solve problems. And don't collect language, because somebody who's new to programming, they don't need to build a collection of languages for their resume. um, Most of the companies don't care how many languages you know. What they mostly care about is whether you can do your job or not. So don't collect languages and don't collect frameworks. uh, Again, somebody who's new to programming, they look at maybe React is very famous these days, so I'm going to learn React. And then another thing comes along and they say, no, I want to learn that thing. And they keep jumping from one framework to the other. And at the end of the day, they haven't built their problem solving skills
Mm.
well enough to be able to create anything, right? So your focus should be able to create something and not collecting languages and frameworks. But at the same time, is to confine themselves to a specific language. Now they uh, to say, for example, now I've learned JavaScript or whatever, and I'm not gonna code in Java or whatever, and C++ or any other language, because I haven't learned it. When you're beginning, you are building yourself as an engineer, software engineer, and you're learning to make programs, and you're sticking to whatever language or framework. But when time comes to build things, you shouldn't be hesitant in picking whatever tool that's necessary to do your job. I have people come up to me who have told me, like, my boss told me to write a program in this language, and I've spent my time learning some other language and framework, and I don't want to do it. Some people just straight away tell their manager that I don't want to do in this language. So I think that's not a healthy attitude for somebody who's new in their career, because once you learned a language, right, then writing program in another language is just translating keywords, right? You
Mm.
just need to know how do you express the same loop in the other
Mm.
language, or whatever constructs you've learned, how to translate them into the other language. It's not that big of a deal to learn another language.
Yeah.
So while as a beginner you should pick one language and learn to make programs, but once you've learned that, then don't limit yourself to one thing. There is a balance there, obviously. You use whatever tool that's needed at job to build the program, but you don't keep switching also just for the sake of it, right? uh, you if even if you have the flexibility, I don't recommend just picking every latest framework just because it's latest and everybody's talking about it. You can learn on your own, but don't experiment, especially when you're building something for somebody else that they have to maintain. uh, Spend your weekends or your spare time to learn any hot stuff that's out there in the market. And another mistake, and also a recommendation, is to not depend on your company or your whatever boot camp that you've been to or university to teach you everything, right? You Learning is your own responsibility. If you want to learn something, that's your own responsibility. These people are there, whether it's your instructor in the boot camp or in the university. Their job is to just introduce these concepts to you. Internet has everything. There are plenty of books. You don't have to go around asking people, can you tell me which book should I read? Go to amazon.com and search for book with the highest ratings, and you can now find any book that on any topic, right? You don't need anybody to give you any
Mm.
recommendations. You can buy a book, you can watch videos, you can read articles. So uh, don't depend on anybody. Be responsible for your own learning, and know that this is something that you'll have to do throughout your career. uh, you can't rely on your job to otherwise. If, for example, in your job you're building an application that's in a specific framework in a specific language, and you've been maintaining it for last 1 or 2 years, right? You can't limit yourself to whatever you're doing at work. You'll have to spend some time outside of work hours, whether it's on weekends or whatever spare time you have, to keep up with whatever is going on in the industry by reading articles and improving your craft, right? That is something you'll have to do, and that is as long as you're a software engineer, you'll have to keep doing that. So not depending on your company and not depending on any specific person to learn. This is basically some of the things that I would tell people to do and not do at the same time.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. This is such a good one. I think there will be a bit, one of good suggestion I've received in the last years, because I've talked with a lot of people, and uh, they're not they're the suggestions are good, but your suggestion is kind of a more broad in a broader way. So yeah, I think it can be applicable widely. Uh, but anyway, do you have any hobby or something you also doing your days? Maybe you like to play games or something during your leisure time.
No, I don't play games anymore. I used to
Okay.
play computer games long ago when I
Oh,
was
okay.
young. Now I have family and kids,
Oh
so
yeah, play around with the kids. Yeah.
if I have spare time, I spend with them. Other than that, I read books and some open source projects that I contribute to in my part time. Other than that,
Okay.
just time with the family.
Okay. Well, okay, maybe, I guess this is it. This is the end of our conversation. Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair for the time and for the chance. Alhamdulillah. I hope that this video can also be can come up with a lot of good things for those my fellow programmers who just started to learn programming and stuff. And yeah, I hope you have a good day. Hope Allah will also always protect you and your family. I see you maybe, yeah, in the future, maybe in LinkedIn or something like that. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi